Hello, everybody. Welcome to another video. In this relatively short Bible teaching video, we're going to be exploring an answer to an interesting question that was brought to me a week ago. Thought it was an interesting question, well worth exploring for a little bit of time. And the question is faith a work? As it's taught in the Bible, is faith a type of or kind of work? And it's not something that I'm not going to try to make this video as, I'm leading you down the path, building suspense. Which way am I going to go? Am I going to land on yes? Am I going to land on no? I'll just say right up front, my knee-jerk response to that question was faith will work? No, of course not at all. But I think there's some interesting things in the Bible text that I'll show you that make it well worth discussion and exploration. In the Mormon mindset, this is a view that I've heard taught fairly frequently. I've been involved with outreach activities to Mormons for quite a few years now. And I will say that given what I understand about the Mormon mindset, it doesn't surprise me all that much that they'll say that yes, faith is a work. Because if you look at it from this perspective, if you're I'll say an average believing Mormon, you belong to a church that teaches that you need to do works to earn your certain level of salvation. Maybe to phrase that a different way, what happens to you in the afterlife is a product of the works that you have or haven't done in this lifetime. So, so when you've already bought into that model, you're going to be reading the Bible, or I'll say it's highly likely that you're going to be reading the Bible looking for things that validate that system that you've bought into. So when you read the Bible, phrases that seem to endorse that doctrine are going to stand out as big and bold to you. And I was talking to a Mormon guy about this a couple weeks back, and he gave me an analogy. The analogy he gave me was that faith necessarily contains an element of works to it, because he said, for example, if we're standing in a building and he comes to me and he says, John, the building's on fire, you got to get out. He said, if I believe in what he's telling me, if I believe that the building's on fire, if I have faith in his in his message, in what he's telling me, I'm going to necessarily evacuate the building. That was his analogy, that it makes no sense to say, yes, I have faith that the building's on fire, but I'm just going to sit here. His view was real faith in what he's telling me will be demonstrated by the work of me evacuating the building. And conversely, me remaining in the building is a testimony of my lack of faith in what he's saying. So his view was the two are necessarily intertwined. They can't be separated. And I said to him at the time, I thought about his analogy for a bit, and I said, but I think in a way, your analogy is perfect in terms of how it measures faith and works. But it's also perfect in terms of the flaws of trying to intertwine faith and works. Because let's go through a couple of considerations. You come running into the room and you say, John, the building's on fire. What if I'm physically paralyzed? I can absolutely 100% believe what you're telling me, but I'm not leaving the building because I can't, right? Because there's more to it than just me believing you or not believing you. Maybe you come running in the building. Maybe I'm not paralyzed. Maybe I'm not paralyzed, but maybe my kids are upstairs, and I'm not leaving the building until I get my kids out. So again, there's more to the discussion than just do I believe you, yes or no. Um, maybe maybe I've experienced some kind of trauma in the past, or maybe I'm just someone that kind of emotionally um, runs pretty high strung as a kind of a general ambient kind of sense, so that when you come running into the room and you tell me the room is on fire or the building's on fire, maybe I just kind of like freak out and freeze. I mean, that it may sound like, maybe that's a forced example, but I think of it as that's the reason why corporations appoint fire marshals, right? Because whenever a fire alarm goes off, a certain percentage of people will get up and make their way to the exit, and a certain other percentage of people will just tense up and lose their ability to reason. And so you need someone to come along behind them and say, Bill, you got to leave. Right, the door's over here, this way. Right. So once again, going back to the guy's analogy, that's the issue of intertwining faith and works, and that's the issue of looking at somebody and saying, I don't see works, so therefore there's no faith. As I say, it was a perfect analogy because it demonstrates the presumption of saying, I'm not seeing works, so there must not be any faith, when in reality, there's much more to it than that. When in reality, it's a huge error on our part to let's get out of the burning building analogy and back into Christian faith. It's hugely presumptuous and prone to error to look at the life of a Christian and say, I'm not seeing works with this person, so therefore I don't think there's faith. Right? That's the error of going down that road. So we could be kind of speeding headlong toward a quick resolution of this question, but there's a passage in the Bible that I wanted to show us, which I think keeps things a little more interesting. If I jump over here, hopefully you can see that, just so you can follow with me. I'm in John chapter 6. The chapter begins the feeding of the 5,000, and I'm scrolling down. Jesus walks on the water. I'm still going down, down to beginning verse 26 here. We see this kind of back and forth between Jesus and the people having this conversation. As I say, it's going back and forth. Jesus, do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that lasts for eternal life. The people say, here we go, verse 28. The people say to Jesus, verse 28, therefore they said to him, what are we to do so that we may accomplish the works of God? Verse 29, Jesus answered and said to them, this is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. So that kind of settles it, doesn't it? I mean, I've torn apart the burning building analogy. That's not a very good analogy if you're wanting to present that faith and works are inexorably tied together. They're clearly not. But isn't Jesus saying here in John 6, verse 29, that these are the works of God? The works of God are that you believe in him who he has sent. And that word, if you're not familiar, that word believe in the original Greek, it's the exact same word as faith, right? So Jesus is saying the work of God is that you have faith in whom he is sent, right? So that's a strong argument for a yes vote. And so some people will show you that verse and they'll say, okay, so well, Jesus just answered the question, right? And so then the question for you is, do you believe Jesus here that faith is a work, or do you disagree with Jesus? Do you ignore Jesus? Do you not care what he has to say? So which is it? Is faith a work, or do you ignore Jesus? And when you're discussing matters of faith, when you're discussing the Bible with brothers and sisters, please don't do that. It's 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 kind of obnoxious, and it's just not pleasant. And as Christians, it's just not a very respectful way to address each other, right? To ask a question of you and force you to a point where there's only two answers, right? I'm only going to give you two answers. Do you agree with me, or do you ignore Jesus? Those are your two choices. And inherent in that dichotomy is the assumption that I'm right, of course, because I'm presenting a view. This is what I believe, and to disagree with what I believe is to ignore Jesus. So which camp are you in? It's just not a very, as I said, not a very respectful and not a very pleasant way to discuss the Bible. So please, please don't do that when you're conversing with your friends, your brothers, your sisters, your fellow church members. What I will often do when I'm having these types of conversations with people, if I'm aware of a passage like this, John 6:29, and somebody seems to be speaking of a certain belief that seems to counter that, um, I'll phrase the question, "What do you do with John 6:29?" So that way, I'm not trying to force them down any particular avenue. I'm not trying to force them into a dichotomy where disagreeing with my view of that passage is disagreeing with Jesus. I'm just showing them, if they're teaching a certain doctrine, I'm saying, here's a passage that seems to contradict that, and I'm interested to hear from you. What do you make of that passage? Right? So, um, so, so let's ask myself that same question. John, what do you do with John 6:29 if you're going to say that faith is not a work? Well, the first thing I'll say is I'm not ignoring or rejecting Jesus here. I absolutely agree and affirm with what he says to the people. I just think that there's a bit more going on in his words here. I don't think he's literally saying to them that faith is a work. I don't think that's the correct intent of what Jesus was trying to tell the people. So let's explore a couple of things as to why I would even say that, why I don't believe that faith is a work. Well, so the first place I would go to is just definitionally, the two words mean entirely different things. If you think of what faith is and what a work is, they're completely different things. It's like, it's like cracking open dictionary and looking at the word cat and looking at the word cucumber. It completely different, completely unrelated. If we think about what faith is a matter of belief. Faith is something that you believe in. I can, if we step out of Christian faith for a minute, because sometimes it's easier to understand terms if we switch contexts, I can believe that the New York Yankees are the best team in baseball. Don't send me hate mail. I'm not saying the New York Yankees are the best team in baseball. I'm just saying that I can have faith, I can have belief that the New York Yankees are the best team in baseball, and I can believe that apart from any works, right? I can sit here completely deadpan with my eyes closed, with the lights turned out in this room, and I can believe that the Yankees are the best team in baseball. It doesn't require any visible component. It doesn't require any spoken word. It doesn't require anything to back up that belief. I just believe it. Now, counter that with the concept of a work, a good way that I think I'll explain what works are, is that the Greek word for work is ergos, which from which we get the English word erg. And what do we measure with ergs? We measure energy expenditure. So if I run up and down a staircase, for example, we can calculate how many ergs of energy it would take me to traverse the staircase. So faith is a belief. It doesn't require any movement. It doesn't require any work. It doesn't require any visible component. Works, in contrast, are entirely visible components. It's the actual doing of things. It's the expending of energy to get things done. So if we jump back to my baseball analogy for a second, I can believe the New York Yankees are the best team in baseball. I can do works that demonstrate that belief, right? I can go online and I can buy a baseball jersey or a baseball cap that has the New York Yankees branding on it. I can purchase season tickets to go watch every single game. I can travel to New York City just to see the Yankees. There's all kinds of things that I can do that are visible, that reflect my belief, but my belief isn't contingent on those things, right? If I decide not to buy a jersey or a ball cap, if I decide not to spend money on season tickets, not to travel to Yankee Stadium, my belief isn't any less. I still believe they're the best team in baseball, and I may or may not have works that reflect that belief. So that's kind of the definitional difference between between faith and a work. They're just not the same thing at all. The other thing that I would say, if we consider the idea of faith being a work, let me jump to another passage. Actually, there's a couple we'll go to. If we go to Ephesians chapter 2, there's quite a well-known scripture here, down verse 8. Ephesians 2, verse 8. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. So what Paul is saying here to the church at Ephesus is their salvation is by grace, through faith, not of themselves, a gift of God, not a result of works. So it's through faith, it's not a result of works. But if faith is a type of work, then this passage is nonsense, right? It doesn't make any sense. It can't be. If faith is a type of work, it can't be through faith, but not a result of works. Do you see what I mean? If we try to say that faith is a work, this passage makes no sense at all, because it can't be by faith and not by works if faith is a work, right? If faith is a work, I have no idea what this passage is saying. It's incomprehensible to me, right? It renders the text completely baffling. Right? I'll give you another one. Romans chapter 4, the book of Romans, we see Paul talking about the nature of salvation, and he kind of concludes chapter 3 talking about how it's only through faith we can be justified before God. And then beginning chapter 4, I think where Paul switches gears here is touching on the idea that, okay, so it's justification through faith that renders us righteous before God. And then Paul kind of goes back and says, well, let's look back into the past. How were people justified in the past? And so chapter 4 here, what then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, has found? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. Well, what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now, to the one who works, the wages are not credited as a favor, but as what is due. But to the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. So I'll just say, in plain language, I think what Paul is saying here is that Abraham could not have been justified by works. What does Scripture say? Paul says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Paul is quoting back to Genesis 15, verse 6 here. So Abraham, again, same word, that the word believe, same word as faith. So Abraham faithed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And then verse 5 again, just to underline the point again, to the one who does not work, but believes, same word as faith, in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. So Abraham, not justified by works, justified by faith. So back to our point again, if faith is a type of work, once again, I have no idea what to make of this passage, right? It becomes incomprehensible. I don't know what it's saying if faith is a work. So those are a couple of issues that I have with buying into the idea that faith is a work. So given all of that, what do we do with John 6, verse 29? Let's go back there. Back. You. Okay. So we've already gone through it once. I won't go through it a second time. But here's what I think is going on in verse 29. When Jesus says, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." As I said earlier, I don't think Jesus is saying here that believing in God or having faith in God is a work. The people were asking, what are we to do so that we may accomplish the works of God? Here's what I think is going on in this passage. This is what I think Jesus is saying. I've talked about what I don't think he's saying. And I'll use another analogy. I like analogies, so bear with me. And analogies will be a big part of this channel. So consider this example. Imagine that I'm a super generous guy, and you look a little tired. You look a little worn down, and I don't know how much imagining that you have to do, but you probably have to do more imagining that I'm a generous guy than you're tired. But anyway, I say to you, you look like you could use a break. I'm going to pay for an all expenses vacation for you and your family. And you say, well, that's fantastic. Sorry, by the way, this is a hypothetical example. I apologize. You say, that's fantastic. Whatever can I do to pay you back? And I say to you, pay me back by having a good time. Pay me back by recharging your batteries, spending time with your family, enjoying yourself. Pay me back by enjoying yourself. That is a reasonable conversation. It's not ridiculously forced. It doesn't, rip language out of its original meaning. It's a reasonable conversation. But nobody would take what I just said as meaning that having a good time on vacation represents a reasonable approximate value repayment of the cost of the vacation, right? Nobody would see it that nobody would interpret it that way, that I was saying by enjoying yourself it will square the debt between us, right? You wouldn't say to your family as you're getting on a plane, now guys, I know this is all fun and games, but we have to have a good time, because if we don't have a good time, then I still owe John for this vacation, right? He told me we have to enjoy ourselves in order to pay him back, right? Nobody would interpret it that way. To state what I was saying more literally, when I say pay me back by having a good time, what I'm really kind of driving at is I'm saying I don't want you to pay me back. I don't need you to pay me back. I'm not asking you to pay me back. Um, but I do want you to have a good time, because that's why I'm paying for the vacation. I do want you to spend time with your family. I do want you to recharge your batteries, but I'm not asking for repayment, right? What I was doing was I was just using the way you phrased your question as kind of a launch point for how I responded. You asked, how could you pay me back? And I just answered your question, but it wasn't a literal, you know what I'm saying. It wasn't a literal, this is how you pay me back. I was just more using your phrasing in my response. And I think that's exactly what's going on here in John 6:29. The crowd are asking, how do we do the works of God? And Jesus says to him, this is how you do the work of God. Believe in him who he has sent. I don't think he's literally saying that belief is a work. He was just using my vacation analogy. He was borrowing their phrasing to tell them what he wanted them to do. So that's, in a nutshell, how I would go about answering the question. Is faith a work? No, I don't believe it is. I believe that faith is faith, works are works. I don't think they're the same thing. I don't think faith is a type of works. And I think that Jesus was just speaking in a specific way. As I said, playing into the language that the crowd uh, posed their question, is how he responded back to it. So that's what I think. That is what I have to share with you today. Um, yeah, if you have any responses, if you strongly agree, strongly disagree, if there's any other Bible passages that you would like to talk about or you would like to hear about, by all means, drop me a line, thegospelofjohn@gmail.com. I would be happy to hear from you, and I will see you next time.